Elephant Island lies at the outer edge of the South Shetland Islands, where the Southern Ocean presses against Antarctica's northern reach. It is mountainous and icebound for most of the year. Glaciers descend from its interior plateau and break into fractured slopes of rock and snow. There is no natural harbor. The coastline is abrupt, exposed to prevailing winds, and lashed by surf driven from thousands of miles of open water. On its northern shore is a narrow strip of shingle and stone later named Cape Wild. It is little more than a crescent of beach beneath steep cliffs. In winter, daylight shortens quickly. Temperatures remain below freezing. Wind moves without obstruction across the sea and strikes the land with force. Sea ice forms and breaks apart in irregular fields offshore. No permanent settlement has ever existed there. There are no trees, no soil deep enough for vegetation beyond moss and lichen. The island is visited only by seals and penguins, and by ships that rarely pass within sight of it. In 1916, this shore became an unintended refuge. It stood beyond established shipping routes and outside regular contact with the inhabited world. To reach it required either precise navigation or accident. To leave it required more than endurance. It required a crossing of the Southern Ocean. By 1914, much of the Antarctic coastline had been charted, yet the continent remained untraversed from sea to sea. Sir Ernest Shackleton proposed a crossing of the Antarctic continent by way of the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, passing through the South Pole. The plan was direct in concept and complex in execution. One party would land on the Weddell Sea coast, establish a base, and begin the transcontinental march. A second party, sailing separately to the Ross Sea, would lay supply depots along the latter half of the intended route. The expedition was named the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Its Weddell Sea vessel was the Barquentine Endurance, built in Norway for polar conditions. Her hull was constructed of thick oak and reinforced for pressure from pack ice. She carried provisions intended to last 2 years, along with sledges, dogs, and equipment for extended travel across ice. The crew numbered 28. They were drawn from varied backgrounds: merchant seamen, naval officers, scientists, carpenters, engineers, and able-bodied sailors. Among them were Frank Worsley, a New Zealand navigator, Tom Crean, an experienced Irish seaman of prior Antarctic expeditions, and Frank Wild, Shackleton's second-in-command, who had already served on multiple polar journeys. Several men had sailed south before under both Shackleton and Captain Scott. Others were younger and less experienced, selected for skill and reliability rather than rank alone. The expedition departed England in August 1914, days after the outbreak of the First World War. Shackleton offered his ship and crew to the British government. The offer was declined. He was instructed to proceed. By December, Endurance had reached South Georgia Island, the last inhabited outpost before the Antarctic mainland. Norwegian whalers there reported heavy pack ice in the Weddell Sea that season. Shackleton delayed departure for several weeks, waiting for improved conditions. In early January 1915, he ordered the ship southward. The Weddell Sea was known for its dense and unpredictable ice. Unlike the Ross Sea, it offered no reliable coastal route. Once within its pack, ships depended on shifting leads, temporary openings between flows, to advance. Progress could be swift or halted entirely without warning. Through January, Endurance threaded through belts of ice, sometimes advancing, sometimes waiting for pressure to ease. By mid-month, the ship was approximately 1 day's sail from the intended landing site at Vosel Bay. Then the pack closed. At first, the immobilization appeared temporary. The crew continued routine duties. Scientific observations were conducted. Dogs were exercised on the surrounding floes. The ship drifted slowly with the ice, carried by currents beyond the control of sail or engine. Shackleton had anticipated obstacles. Polar travel required patience and adjustment. Yet the Weddell Sea did not loosen its grip. The drift continued northward and westward, away from the continent they had intended to cross. The expedition's objective, to march across Antarctica, remained formally intact. Supplies were still abundant. The ship was undamaged. Discipline held. But the direction of movement had changed. The ice, not the crew, determined their course. Through the austral winter of 1915, Endurance remained fixed within the Weddell Sea pack. The sun disappeared below the horizon in May. Darkness settled for months at a time, interrupted only by brief twilight. Temperatures fell well below freezing. The surrounding ice thickened and hardened. The ship drifted with the floes, carried slowly northward. Pressure built as separate fields of ice converged. At intervals, the hull groaned under compression. Timber beams flexed. Shackleton ordered stores and boats prepared for rapid removal if necessary. The crew continued routines, observations, maintenance, exercise of the dogs, but the margin for safety narrowed. By September, the returning light revealed pressure ridges forming near the hull. The ice rose in fractured slabs, some higher than the deck. On October 24, 1915, heavy compression forced the floes together with sustained force. The starboard side of the ship was crushed inward. Water entered through open seams. Pumps were manned continuously, but the inflow exceeded their capacity. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. Supplies were transferred onto the ice, sledges, tents, food, 3 lifeboats, instruments, and personal gear limited to essentials. The men established a camp on a nearby floe while the damaged vessel remained lodged upright in the pressure. Over the following weeks, the hull twisted further. On November 21, 1915, Endurance slipped beneath the ice and disappeared. The expedition's original objective ended there. What remained were 28 men standing on a moving platform of frozen sea, hundreds of miles from land. The nearest known refuge lay far to the northwest, Elephant Island, at the edge of the South Shetlands. Reaching it required patience and judgment. The floe beneath them was unstable. Direct sledge travel toward land was attempted but proved slow and exhausting across broken ridges. Shackleton decided to wait for the drift to carry them closer to open water. The decision removed control from immediate action and placed it in the movement of the sea. In April 1916, as the ice began to fragment, the men launched their boats into frigid water. For days they rowed and sailed through heavy swell and floating ice. On April 15, 1916, they sighted land. It was Elephant Island. Landfall did not bring resolution. Elephant Island offered solid ground, but little else. The men came ashore at Cape Valentine before moving westward along the coast in search of a more secure landing. After several attempts against surf and wind, they reached the narrow beach later known as Cape Wild. For the first time in 497 days, the expedition stood on land not made of ice. The ground was uneven and exposed. Snow drifted against the base of steep cliffs. Waves broke without protection from a harbor. The island lay well outside established shipping routes. No rescue would arrive by chance. Shackleton assessed the position quickly. The men were exhausted from 5 days in open boats. Frostbite and swollen limbs were common. Clothing remained damp from spray and melting snow. Immediate priorities were shelter, food, and organization. The 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, were hauled above the high water line. 2 were turned upside down and propped on stones to form the roof of a crude hut. Sails were stretched along the sides to reduce drafts. The interior floor consisted of stones and flattened shingle. Snow filled gaps and later froze solid, forming partial insulation. Space inside the shelter was limited. The 22 men who would remain there slept in close proximity, arranged by watch system. Cooking was done outside when conditions allowed, using blubber from seals and penguins as fuel. The smoke was heavy and persistent. Ventilation was minimal. Food came primarily from the surrounding wildlife. Elephant seals hauled out along the shore in early months. Later, smaller seals and penguins became the principal source of meat. The animals were killed quickly and butchered methodically. Meat was boiled in seawater. Blubber was rendered for heat. Nothing was wasted. Fresh meat provided necessary nutrients and prevented the onset of scurvy, which had afflicted earlier polar expeditions. Routine formed gradually. Each man was assigned duties. Watches were kept through night hours to maintain the blubber stove and manage snow accumulation on the shelter. Clothing was dried when possible. Boots were repaired repeatedly. Instruments salvaged from Endurance were preserved carefully. Shackleton understood that Elephant Island offered no possibility of permanent survival. The island lacked timber and lay beyond known navigation routes. No ship was expected to pass. A voyage for help would be required. After evaluating charts and distances, Shackleton selected South Georgia Island as the destination. The whaling stations there lay approximately 800 nautical miles to the northeast across the Southern Ocean. The journey would require crossing some of the roughest seas in the world in a small open boat. The strongest of the lifeboats, the James Caird, was chosen for modification. Under the direction of ship's carpenter Harry McNish, its sides were raised, decking added, and internal support strengthened using salvaged materials. The seams were sealed with improvised caulking made from lampwick and seal blood mixed with paint. Ballast was added for stability. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton departed Elephant Island aboard the James Caird with 5 companions, Frank Worsley, Tom Crean, Harry McNish, Timothy McCarthy, and John Vincent. Frank Wild was left in command of the 22 men remaining at Cape Wild. Shackleton instructed Wild that if no rescue had arrived by the following spring, preparations should be made to attempt escape in the remaining boats. The departure reduced the camp's numbers but increased uncertainty. Those left behind understood the scale of the voyage. The Southern Ocean between Elephant Island and South Georgia was known for persistent gales, freezing spray, and unpredictable seas. Navigation would rely on brief celestial sightings through cloud breaks. With the James Caird gone, the camp's horizon narrowed. Survival now depended entirely on external return. Frank Wild maintained order through consistency. Meals were served at regular intervals. Cleaning routines were enforced despite limited water. Men were required to remain active. Idleness was discouraged. Conversations about possible failure of the rescue attempt were minimized. Winter approached again. Daylight shortened. Snow accumulated around the shelter, at times burying it nearly to the roofline. Blubber fires continued to burn, leaving soot thick across clothing and skin. The smell of seal oil permeated the confined space. Health varied among the group. Some experienced frostbitten fingers and toes. Others developed digestive issues from diet and limited sanitation. Yet no deaths occurred. Discipline, shared labor, and ration control remained steady. The island did not change. Waves continued to break against the stones. Wind moved without pause. The men waited within a structure built from 2 overturned boats, listening for a sound that did not come. After the departure of the James Caird, time assumed a different scale. The horizon remained empty. No mast appeared beyond the surf. The men at Cape Wild measured days by routine rather than by expectation. Frank Wild maintained the structure established under Shackleton. Duties were assigned each morning. Hunting parties searched for seals and penguins when weather allowed. Blubber was cut and stored. Meat was distributed evenly. The blubber stove required constant attention. If it failed, the interior temperature dropped quickly below freezing. Smoke accumulated beneath the low ceiling of the shelter and escaped slowly through gaps in canvas and planking. Snow drifted repeatedly against the hut. At times, the men dug tunnels to reach the entrance after storms sealed it. Moisture condensed inside from breath and cooking vapor, then froze along the underside of the boats. Sleeping bags became stiff with ice. Clothing, worn continuously, was seldom dry. Physical condition declined gradually. Several men suffered frostbitten extremities from earlier exposure in the boats. Swelling and numbness persisted. 1. Percy Blackborough, the youngest member of the expedition, had lost sensation in his feet during the open boat journey and later required the amputation of several toes, performed by the expedition's surgeon, Alexander Macklin, inside the shelter under limited conditions. The operation was conducted using chloroform and improvised instruments. Blackborough survived. Diet remained monotonous but sufficient. Fresh meat prevented scurvy, though digestive complaints were common. Water was obtained by melting snow or collecting ice from nearby slopes. Psychological strain surfaced in small ways. Sleep was interrupted by wind and the constant movement of men within confined space. Tempers required management. Wilde avoided speculation about Shackleton's chances but expressed steady confidence in eventual return. Each morning, he is recorded as having said that Shackleton might come that day. Outside the shelter, winter storms intensified. The Southern Ocean generated swells that struck the shoreline without obstruction. Ice formed along the beach and broke apart again. The men could do little beyond maintain the camp and wait. Meanwhile, Shackleton's attempt to reach South Georgia faced repeated difficulty. Though the men at Cape Wild did not know the details, the voyage of the James Caird required 16 days in open sea before land was sighted on May 10, 1916. A landing was achieved on the uninhabited southern coast of South Georgia. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean then crossed the island's mountainous interior on foot to reach the whaling station at Stromness. Their arrival secured assistance, but several rescue attempts were delayed by sea ice and weather. At Elephant Island, months passed without news. The sun began to return gradually in late winter. Light increased by minutes each day. The men repaired gear in anticipation of possible movement. The remaining boats were kept ready, though launching them without clear direction would have offered little advantage. Isolation remained complete. No signal could be sent. No smoke beyond their own marked the sky. They continued to wait. After reaching South Georgia in May 1916, Ernest Shackleton moved quickly to organize a rescue. The first attempt, using a small whaling vessel, was halted by heavy pack ice in the Weddell Sea. A second effort from the Falkland Islands met similar conditions. A third attempt, supported by the Uruguayan government, also failed to penetrate the ice fields that guarded the approaches to Elephant Island. Time passed. Winter tightened across the Southern Ocean. Shackleton refused to abandon the effort. He traveled to Punta Arenas, Chile, where the Chilean government agreed to provide a vessel capable of another attempt. The ship was the Yelcho, a small steam-powered tug commanded by Captain Luis Pardo. Unlike Endurance, Yelcho was not reinforced for polar ice. It carried no wireless equipment and limited heating. The voyage south would depend on timing and clear passage through drifting pack. On August 25, 1916, Yelcho departed Punta Arenas. Weather conditions were favorable. Sea ice had receded temporarily, opening a navigable corridor toward the South Shetland Islands. Shackleton stood aboard as the ship advanced southward. At Cape Wild, the 22 men remained unaware of the approaching vessel. They had continued routine through the winter. Supplies, though reduced, remained sufficient. The shelter still stood, partially buried in snow and reinforced with stone. On August 30, 1916, shortly after midday, a ship appeared offshore. Accounts describe the moment without embellishment. The men recognized Shackleton on deck. Weather conditions allowed immediate approach. There was no need for prolonged signaling. The surf was manageable. Boats were launched from the beach. Within a short time, all 22 men were transferred aboard Yelcho. No life had been lost on Elephant Island. The evacuation was efficient. Personal gear was minimal. The shelter, built from the overturned boats of Endurance, was left standing. It would remain on the island for decades as a relic of the camp. Yelcho turned north the same day. Conditions held. The vessel cleared the surrounding ice without obstruction and returned to Punta Arenas on September 3, 1916. The total time from the loss of endurance to the rescue at Elephant Island had been nearly 10 months. From departure in 1914 to final evacuation in 1916, the expedition had lasted over 2 years. All 28 members of the Weddell Sea party survived. The events at Elephant Island concluded without ceremony. After arriving in Punta Arenas, the men dispersed gradually, some returning to Britain, others entering military service as the First World War continued. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition did not achieve its original objective of crossing the continent. The planned transcontinental route was never attempted. Yet the survival of the Weddell Sea party assumed lasting significance within the history of polar exploration. The loss of the Endurance ended one phase of Antarctic ambition. It demonstrated the limits of even reinforced wooden vessels against sustained ice pressure in the Weddell Sea. The drift that began in January 1915 and ended with the ship sinking in November illustrated the scale and unpredictability of Antarctic pack ice. Leadership during the crisis became central to later historical assessments. Ernest Shackleton did not complete the continental crossing he had proposed. Instead, his reputation came to rest on preservation of life under extreme isolation. Decisions made after the ship's loss, abandoning heavy equipment, conserving energy on the drifting floes, launching boats at the appropriate moment, selecting a small party for the South Georgia voyage, were examined in subsequent accounts as examples of measured judgment. The camp at Cape Wild also demonstrated collective endurance. The men who remained on Elephant Island maintained discipline through months without communication. Fresh meat prevented nutritional collapse. Routine limited disorder. Medical intervention, though improvised, proved effective. No fatalities occurred among the 28 men of the Weddell Sea party. Elephant Island itself remains uninhabited. The shelter built from 2 overturned boats still stands in preserved form, protected as a historic site. It is a physical marker of a winter spent beyond established routes and beyond expectation of immediate rescue. The expedition did not alter the geography of Antarctica. It did not redraw maps or establish new claims. Its outcome was quieter. 28 men entered the Weddell Sea. 28 men returned. The ice closed over the site where the ship sank. The island remained where it had always been, remote, exposed, and unchanged.